Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our session on recording analysis. I am here, Zoe, and my colleague, esteemed colleague, Morgan Bayhnam-Williams is here as well. Hello, Morgan.
Hello, everybody.
So just quickly, can we have a very quick hands up for people who came to the session last time? One. Just one? Two.
Two.
Okay, cool. What we're going to do is we are going to very quickly run through some of the things that we talked about at the start of the last session, very quickly. And we will kind of scooch through those and then just move on to the recordings. But we just wanted to make sure that those people who hadn't been we were all coming at this from the same place. So we think that recording your sessions is possibly the most useful thing that you can do as a Cox to sort of help yourself. Would you say that's fair, Morgan?
Yeah, I think from a coxing specific, in terms of what you actually say and when we're racing, I think it's a really invaluable tool.
So I think we sort of suggested, because a few people have asked, like, how often should you record? So I think maybe to start with, aim for once a week and try and vary up what you're recording. So some weeks you might record like a longer training session or a tech session. Some weeks it might be pieces or races. And if you're struggling to kind of get to grips with how to go about it, just start with a really small section of it. You don't need to listen to and analyze an hour and a half of a training session. You could listen to 5 minutes of it. And you could just say, right, I'm going to take this focus and that's what I'm going to look for here. So I think you need to you can make it quite short. You can make it quite snappy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. One thing I used to do with the longer sessions, if I wanted to get a sort of bigger picture, is I'd do something like put them on when I was driving or something, or put them on when I was traveling somewhere. So I'm not, they don't have to have my entire focus, but they're kind of in the background, they're playing over. It was a good way for me to think, is this interesting? Is it not? Because if I would kind of think if I've really switched off from this, then it was probably quite boring. But that was the way I would sort of go about it. So it doesn't have to be a big onerous task, basically, is the point we want to make from that. This is a question we often get asked. How do you get over that cringe factor of listening to your own recordings? I don't know, Morgan, if you would agree with this. I have absolutely no idea. I hate listening to my own recordings. I still hate it. I'm going to hate it in 10 minutes time when I'm playing my recording. I don't know.
I honestly think you get more used to it. I think the first time you do it is really quite awful. But I think you do kind of get used to it. You get used to like how your voice sounds. You get used to the maybe the pitch in which you're most effective. So I think when you feel uncomfortable or weird about it and it is cringy, you're being so hypercritical of yourself. And that's why I think actually listening to your own recordings, you're gonna be your biggest critique. So you're gonna give yourself the most feedback, the most things to work on. And sometimes that means we're hypercritical and we miss our strengths. But just remember, if you do, when you I'm going to say when you feel uncomfortable, because you are going to feel a bit uncomfortable. When you feel that way, remember you're really getting the most out of yourself, and that's why you feel a little bit weird about it.
So we've had a couple of questions about what to use when you record. So just want to go over this again. There's lots of options. A cheap dictaphone. I think mine was like 10, 15 quid off Amazon. If you've got access to something like a Cox Orb that records for you, lovely. You can, if you've got a good quality phone, you can just buy a relatively cheap like clip-on mic that you can plug in, or even a Bluetooth one. Apple Watch. This is technology. This is a technological step way beyond me, and I'm not an Apple person. But Morgan seems to think it's doable. And GoPro. So that's, I think, quite a good one, because you then get the opportunity to not only listen but also relay that back to what you're seeing as well. So you can listen to your calls and actually then you can see, did that have an impact? Marcus, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the coxes here at UVA, they hate it on race day because they know I'm going to make them wear a GoPro on their head. But we get so much out of it, and it's so helpful, not only in helping the coxes and going through kind of what they're saying, what they're seeing, their racing strategies, even their boat feel, but it also helps in terms of coaching the rowers and the crew. So it's a massive teaching tool. You can teach the whole team, the whole crew about maybe race psychology, what's going through their head at different times, different strategies. So it does help. You do feel a bit silly. And a lot of the coxes, they use their Apple Watch, and it's got the little dictaphone element on, and they say it works really well.
Cool. So very quickly, just to go through sort of methods for analysis, it's very individual. So some people like really detailed spreadsheets with sort of different columns for what different things they were working on, what they've listened to, all that sort of thing. Some people like to have a more freehand journal. One thing that I would suggest for everyone is make sure you label your recordings really well. I have a lot of recordings that say things like, I'm not even joking, that say things like, some 500 meters at rate 24, blah. And it's like, I have no idea what this is. I don't know which crew this was with. I don't know what year it was with. So just try and have a consistent labeling system so that when you're going back, it's easy. And then the other thing is thinking about group analysis. Sometimes more heads is better. If you've got people that you're comfortable and confident sharing your recordings with, like we're about to do, so you'll see when we share our recordings, and Morgan and I will feedback to each other, and hopefully you guys will give us some feedback as well. You know, that's a really good way to get extra sort of harness extra brains. You know, I find that certainly very useful because I only have the one brain cell. Now, Morgan, I'll hand over to you. This is your baby.
So another thing to help you in terms of going over your recordings, trying to make them better, if you think about the structure of your recording, you're essentially calling a race, you're feeling a boat, so you're trying to execute a plan, a strategy. And we want to try and bring that home in relation to the speed at which the boat's moving. So anyone really, whether you've got a stopwatch on your hand, whether you've got a speed coach, you can get the data that tells you how fast you're going per 500 meters. If you're recording that data, you can get, if it's a speed coach, you get your 100-meter splits, you could get your 250-meter splits. If you've just got a stopwatch or a coach with you, they could time you off markers, so 250s or 500s. And this is just a very simple Excel chart, as basic as you like. You plug that data into an Excel spreadsheet, and it's going to give you the distance that you're going through on the race and your speed at that point in time. On this particular one, this is actually from one of my races. So this is from Under 23 Worlds back in 2015. This is our repechage. No, not our repechage, our exhibition race. And this gives you kind of your splits, our splits per each 250 meters. And what I used to do is just overlay our race calls and see what was happening to our boat speed. So ideally, when we're going down a 2,000-meter track, you want to try and keep your speed as consistent as possible. You might look for maybe like a 2-second split difference in your second and third 500 in comparison to your first and your last. You want to have very consistent pacing, essentially. So this is a really easy way to real time look back at what's actually happening to the boat speed when you're calling certain things. So this is just the silly things you think about when you're a U23 cox and you've got random calls that people love. But we've got it simply goes through our start. We've got pretty good speed off the start. You're always going to have good speed. The biggest challenge is how well can you hold that speed between 500 and 750. This is going to be our transition element. And so you're thinking about, well, what can we do different in our transition? How do I call that differently? And what do the rowers need to be thinking and actually doing in order to sustain that speed as we transition to our kind of base rhythm in the middle of the track? You can see that we're able to gain some speed as we go through the 1,000, which you'd expect. It's quite a big speed change, probably because we dropped so much speed between 250 and 500, and especially between 500 and 750. And then we see another speed decrease after that. So it's how do we sustain our length and our are technical elements where we're relaxed to kind of hold on to that speed, and on what calls would you put into that? So this is like an easy thing for you guys to do. If you've got this sort of data, it might be a few steps ahead. You might be only coxing 750 meters. It's a bit different, but you could still get 3 250-meter splits out of that if you wanted. But play around with things like this, and you'll start to come up with your own kind of way of doing it. And you can make the graphs as complicated or as easy as you like. You can also plot your rate in relation to your speed alongside that, and you get an idea of your race profile. And you can try and kind of compare these things race to race, so you can see the improvement, or hopefully you can see the improvement in what you're doing out there actually on the racetrack. So it gives you that practical application of the theory side of you actually going through and working on your recordings, and in the same way that the rowers are working on their physiology and their technique.
Morgs, what's Bloody Mary?
That was just a call that they wanted. And do you know what? It evidently worked because they got faster. But I would also say at the U23 level, sometimes you see people, they're less experienced as athletes, so they might have been waiting a bit for that push, and that's how you see such a big response. So as you get into the more senior racing, you would expect to see less deceleration, more of a sustained race profile as you go through.
Love it. So we talked about this before, but we'll mention it again. When you're thinking about your own goals, so when you're listening back to your own recordings, and you're setting those goals up, they need to be what we talk of as SMART goals. So you need to make sure that they are specific, they are measurable, they are achievable, they are relevant to what you're doing, and they have some time limit capacity to them. So it's like this week, next week, I'll do this over the next month. So there's no point in listening to your recordings and thinking, I hate the fact that I have a voice. I hate my voice completely. I totally hate my voice. It's like there's probably not a huge amount. You can change your tone, but you're not going to be able to entirely change your voice. It's impossible. So you need to think, okay, well, I hate my voice. So how do I set a goal up for myself? Well, okay, I'm going to try and be maybe deeper in my voice. Maybe that will make it sound a bit more rooted. Or your goal might be something like, I hate my voice because I think I'm shouting too much. Okay, can I bring intensity whilst not necessarily raising volume? So I think those are the kinds of things. Measurable is a bit of a difficult one with this, with the analysis stuff. There's going to be some stuff which is easy to measure. So, for example, you might have, I want to use athletes' names more during my recording if I'm racing. That might be an example. And you can literally go through your 2K race and count the number of times you've done that. So that's easy to measure. Some things like tone, that's going to be harder to measure. So that's going to be a little bit more objective. But the idea is there. It's got to be something that you can somehow assess, I suppose. Okay. If there are any coaches listening, just quickly to run through what you can think about, or if you're a Cox, this is something that you can present as an idea to your coach about what you want from them when you're looking at recordings. So we want a balance of racing and training, again, aiming for 1 a week, and it can just be 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be any more than that. You can start with one-on-one, but if you've got a big squad, you might do them in pairs, for example, review as a group. You could even do a bigger group if you needed to. But I think it's important to present to coaches that this is not a big time commitment. This shouldn't be something that is taking up loads of time, is taking away from other, their other work, their other jobs. If you're sending them 2 minutes of recording a week, that's something that they can listen to, literally practically while they walk from their car to their house. 2 minutes is nothing. And then if they've got then just 5 minutes to go over that with you, that can be done while the rowers are warming up. That can be done while the rowers are getting the blades out. That is not a big amount of time. So I think it's important to ask that. And I think the more regularly you do it, and Morgan, I imagine you know this because you probably do this with the Coxes, the more regularly that you do it, the more efficient it can be. If you're only going to sit down and listen to a recording once a month, it's going to be a whole palaver and a whole process. But I mean, because you do it in groups, don't you?
Yeah, we have a bit of a mixed way. So We might have a set time where the whole team of 10 coxes come through and we do it, and we'll listen to a whole recording then. And we'll break the entire race down. So we might listen through it once, just all the way through, then we'll start and go through it and say what we each think as we're going along. Or I'll have over a couple of days within the week, and it only adds up to probably about 15 to 20 minutes total time. Each cox will just pop in for 5 minutes, see me. We'll chat through some of their recordings they've got. It might have been from a race, it might be from a piece in training. It might even just be a bit steady rowing. We'll just go over it very quickly. It's not a stressful process. It's very factual. It's a bit more binary, to be honest. It's like, okay, well, this is good. We could try this. What about that? And then we just carry on. It's just a normal part of the daily kind of training. And I think the more part of it, really, I actually think, is just getting into the habit. Once it becomes habitual and you're used to doing it, you can rattle it off very quickly. And that doesn't mean you're not giving it the time of day or attention. You just get better at doing it.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop the share so that I can actually play my recording. Morgan and I have both chosen bits off starts today. We've had a few questions about calls at starts, and obviously it's coming into that bit of the season where you're going to be working on your starts more. They're going to be more important in your racing. So we've both got, I think Morgan's are actually in racing, mine's a training piece. But hopefully we can give some feedback on it, and ideally we use the same kind of model that I think most of us do, where we sort of start with things we liked, then we do things we can work on. So letting me find my recording. So my recording is it was a 1K piece actually in training. It was almost exactly this time of year in Olympic season. So it would have been sort of after the Europeans and probably prepping for the Lucerne World Cup, I would have thought. At that point, what we were working on is everything just being really clear, everything being quite concise, everyone being on the same page. And in terms of our profile, we wanted to really try and keep holding speed through 100, 200, 300 meters so that we didn't have a tail off or a big tail off the start. So I'll play it and we can then, oh no, what's going on? Oh, it's all going wrong. Hang on, sorry. My computer is totally freaking out. Okay, I have it back, I think. So hopefully you guys can hear this. If you can't, shout or give me a thumbs up or do something horrible.
Grip. Yeah, keep moving. Loose. Length, go. Ready for legs, right through. Ready, go. Leg through. Second 100, hold speed. Front of the seat, go. Front 2 wheels. Yeah, a little bit more acceleration from those knees. Are you ready? Go. Knees. Yeah, third 100. Holding speed. Long legs. Go. Leg through. Yeah, I want a little bit more grip from you. More grip. Yeah, 300. Breathe deep. Check that length with the legs. Okay, I've got 128 at 37 and a half. 400 on that hang. 1 stroke at the time. Ready now.
Okay, I think that's enough. It's about a minute and a bit. So if you've got any feedback, so why don't I start with things I did well? Because that's how we should start with our recordings. What did I think I did well? What do I think I need to work on? So I think everything I said was clear. I think you could hear and understand the words, and the commands were clear when I wanted things done. So they were sort of clear and obvious goes. I liked that. I think it was a bit monotonous. I think I would have liked to vary the tone a little bit more, but I liked that I left some spaces and some quiet strokes. I wasn't speaking on every single stroke. So I think if you guys have things you want to say, you want to either type them in the chat or just stick your hand up or just shout out. There's not a huge number of us, so we can just have a chat. And then Morgs, maybe while people are thinking, you can start.
Yeah, I always think it's really interesting thinking about your training recordings. When you do like a training start, your training piece, your training 2Ks, and then your racing ones. I always think you, certainly as a cox, you have like another gear on race day. And I think it was like a really well executed training start. You talked about you want to be very clear, very concise, so you can hear. I always think when you layer up your calls, you want to know, right, what's the plan? What are we about to do? How are we going to do it? And when are we going to do it? And so you give them, right, this is the plan, ready, go. And so they know what the plan is, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it. And I think even simple things like you're able to instruct the start sequence or the start focus. And I think, your first 250 meters or so, what I think you do very well is you still interlay a little bit of technical stuff. So you talk about the front of the seat and in terms of how that affects what the boat feels like and the boat's pickup, it keeps it so much sharper and tighter to the hull around the front. And so actually, if you're thinking about sustaining that speed at 350 and then 400, that is allowing that to happen. Where sometimes I think people think about the start where, well, it's the first 500 meters, so all I can do is be on the gas and that's the only focus. I like how the way you say the words matches what you want from the athletes. So I think in coxing we can really goad or guide the athletes to using our voice to do what we want them to do, which can, if you say it the right way, has a tremendous effect. If you say it the wrong way, probably also has a little bit of a negative effect. So it's being really tactical in the way in which you execute that. And I sort of think I know why this was, because I think it's training, but I think when you then raced, I imagine there was like just a bit, it was like a little bit more commanding, a little bit sharper around the edges, like a little bit crisper. I know certainly for me, when I raced confidently, I would have
That's really strange.
quite
So
well.
what did that dress smell from?
So that's definitely, I think that's like quite cool to see, is how you can have the same sort of structure, but it can be a little bit different between your training execution and your racing execution.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I would have liked to do a bit better was, I think at one point I said something like, oh, I want a bit more grip, which was the right call. But then I don't think I gave enough feedback about whether or not it had happened. I think I gave like a quick sort of like, yeah, but it was a bit sort of lost. I think I probably needed to be like, yeah, that's it, a bit more clearly.
Yeah, or like if it wasn't quite enough. Sometimes I think you're like, yeah, because you want to go. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
I appreciate you're trying to make the change, but you haven't really made it. So you're like, yeah, a little bit more. or if it's really good, you're like, yeah, like I think that's a classic, isn't it?
And I think that's probably what would come out more in racing, because you've got a bit more excitement about it.
For sure. And also you've got that urgency, whereas, if it's not working, you're like, right, that's the right idea. I know we all want this, but we're going to need a little bit more. Whereas in training, you're like, yeah, there's not as many consequences. Whereas I think perhaps that's a skill set that's hard to develop, but important to develop, is if you can have that same urgency in training or a little bit more urgency in training, then does that amplify then the response you get in racing?
I think one of the things that we've had questions a lot about recently, and if anyone else has any feelings about this, please do type them in and get involved in the conversation. But I think one of the questions we've had is about how to make sure that your starts don't sound too busy. And I know when I first started, I was very much taught to call something on every single stroke off the start. And it would often be like the length. So it'd be like 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, half, half. But then I realized quite quickly that actually, if I'm saying 3/4 at the catch of the stroke, it's too late. Like they're already at that length. It's pointless. It's just making noise for the sake of making noise. So after that, I kind of adapted to more using the feel of what I wanted them to do. So, I might say like legs there, or like something to help build the rhythm, and then I might use that for the first few strokes. And then if I wanted them to be a bit looser and kind of start winding the rate up, I might say, okay, now move, loose, so to use my voice a bit more. But I think it's also fine. And I think I did it in that recording to not say things on every single stroke. And as I went through that Olympic season, I think actually my first 20 strokes or so became fewer and fewer words. And actually I reserved in that first bit just for saying basically the calls that were eliciting a change. So, if that was like, right, full length, go, or whatever it was, or big body swing, go, or so to make sure that those things are all happening at the same time. And actually, I think when you're in a race in an 8 in particular, and especially if you're 6 lanes, it's really noisy when you start. You've got everyone going, all the coxes shouting, you might have people on the bank shouting. So actually, if you use fewer calls, then it's going to be much easier for your crew to actually hook on to the important ones when you do make them. I don't know.
I massively agree there for sure. And I think also it then gives you more energy to do a better job later down the track.
Agreed. The other thing that we talked about with starts recently was, again, this is something that I was taught quite early and then did for basically my entire career, was that I wouldn't really talk about where anyone else was at the start for quite a long time. And that was usually 300-400 meters, maybe even more, because in that very early start sequence, you can't change anything. So there's no point saying, oh, we're half a length down, because your rowers can't, they're in that process of the start sequence. They can't really add more. They can't do more there. You have to get into your kind of good rhythm before you kind of start changing things. So at most, I might say something like, oh, we're in the pack. But otherwise, I wouldn't really mention the opposition. It was just about us and getting onto our, sustainable mid-pace that I would do in that early part of the race.
Yeah, I agree. Keeping it simple is, you got to think about like imagine you're racing a car, and a manual car, not an automatic one. And the calls you make are the ones that are allowing the rowers to change gear. And you're going to want to move through those gears as quickly as you can to get the car up and running and absolutely, going as quick as possible. But if you blur the lines, or you get the gear change wrong, you're gonna grind it, and then you're gonna put the clutch down wrong, or so it's trying to be as simple and clear and as effective as you can, so that they can get up there. And then you can start to think about, okay, well, how am I going to sustain this speed, or how am I going to create these moves later on?
Agreed. Cool. Well, if I haven't seen anything from anyone else, so Morgs, do you want to take over and play yours?
Yeah, so I've actually got, they're both going to be a bit short, but I've got essentially the start sequence C recording from Europeans in 2022. So I've got the heat and I've got the final. And I think there's some subtle but important differences between them both. So I'll go one at a time. Hopefully you can hear. I've got to find the right place as well. Maybe we'll talk about them each a little bit, and then we'll talk about how they both reflect. So we'll go one at a time to start with. Okay, so this is the heat.
Finish. Finish. Catch. Lengthen guide. Hitch in 2, 1, go. Leg kick. Leg kick. Leg kick. Good start. Leg square. Legs in 2, run now. Good start, guys. 39. Loose now. Loose. 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 45 seconds. Wind's coming up. On 38. Get ready for the transition. Rhythm in 2. Rhythm in 1. Rhythm in 5.
I felt like I could hear, I don't know if I could hear an alien in the background.
Must be a foreign cox, probably Romanian. Probably the Romanians already hunting us down. So for me, that was my first, not ever, but that was it. Once I had made the senior team, was coxing the women's eight. That was my first multi-lane race since COVID. And I hadn't really thought about it at all until getting out there and sitting on the start line. And I was like, I have not done this in a long time, like well over a year. And I think even I was kind of laughing then whilst I was playing, because for me, like I feel like I could hear the nervousness in my voice. Like it's just like a little bit of like uneasy, a little bit unsure, like I haven't done this for a while, bit rusty. And I think that's quite important. So when you're at your most confident, the how you say things does actually sound different. And I think that is why when you're coxing, you're trying to do it your way. You've got to do it to kind of your own skill set, to your own strengths. I think it's relatively simple, like not talking too much. One thing we worked on was trying to say finish of the stroke, so they would be in time at the release, catch of the next, because that was going to be a shorter stroke. So simple things to just keep them on board, instead of saying three-quarter, half, three-quarter, because then you're already a stroke late. It's kind of like preparing them to be ready for the moment in which they are on. And I always think for us, we tried to have a big emphasis on, we had to hit the transition hard. And I would say I was definitely one of those coxes where I would talk a bit, but if I was going to be aggressive, I was very aggressive. And I think you can kind of hear that in the delivery. And I would say probably you get a lot of feedback when you do that. So it's trying to think about a way in which you can be aggressive without getting too much feedback coming out of that mic, if that makes sense. What do you think as a DT?
I agree in that it was very clear. There was lots of space. It was easy to understand what you wanted and when. And but then it sounded exactly like how you've described. It sounded, I wouldn't say hesitant, but more just not your usual exciting, thing. It sounded like you were just a bit overwhelmed by the situation, and you were still delivering. There was nothing wrong with what you were saying or what you were doing. But it was a bit kind of emotionless. But then that very last bit, it sounded like you were sort of,
and I was like, oh, hang on, I remember how to do this. We're getting into this. Okay.
winding up into it.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's important for coxes to remember, but also coaches, is that you get skill fade. If you haven't done it for ages, and particularly in this season, we just weren't racing the 8. It's so hard to just jump in and do it. And people often expect coxes to be like, you'll be fine, just jump in, say some words, that's it. And that's actually not how it works. Like, you get massive skill fade, and it's because it's such a subjective thing, you really have to be working at it day in, day out. Okay, now I'm going to play you the final, and we'll see if we think we can hear any differences. Got to find the right point. I could also show you what I say when I sit on the stake boat, because I always think that's quite interesting, but I'm up to find that later. Okay.
Finish. Finish. Catch. Length. Go. Late square. Hips in 2, 1, go. Legs hips. Legs hips. Legs hips. Low down. Get ready. Legs go. Spring. 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 Good start. Loose. Coming out long. Length now. Long. Finish. Long. Finish. On 38. 45 seconds. Getting ready. Sit tall. Sit tall. On to the minute. Rhythm 2. Rhythm 1. Rhythm 2. 36.5. Good start, GB.
So I think, I don't know, like you guys might have picked up on this or not, but so that's one race to another, same event. Some of the calls are slightly different. So that shows you how you go away, you review. You don't only review it yourself, but you're reviewing it with the coaches and with the actual athletes. Just kind of defining what you want from them and the reaction you want. We clearly felt that we didn't have the right responses as a complete unit of what we were looking for. And this was definitely a scenario we had. The four were doubling up and they were coming in, the 4 and the pair were doubling up actually to come in to join into the 8, and we had the spare pair in the 8. So it's even more important there to have everybody on the same page when you want the same responses. And I think the giveaway for me, being a little bit more, confident and just ready, like, okay, like I can do this, I know how to do this, is I will say things in different ways, and I probably change my tone a bit more. So instead of it just being like on and then louder and then off and then louder, it's like sometimes when you think I'm going to go up, I'll go down, and it's a little bit more of a flow state. So if you think about how focused you are, trying to operate in a flow state in which it's like it's natural, it's moving with your gut, it's moving with the rhythm of the race and the field in which you're in. And then little things like I was excited for that rhythm call to come in, and I think you can hear that in it. Like I am such a big racer, I love racing, and if your crew can feel that energy, they're going to go and they're going to move. And I remember that transition being really, really good.
Yeah, so we've got a comment that says the second recording is very different. It sounds very confident and racy, which is what I totally agree with. But also just a question about that. So a question about, first of all, what does low down mean?
Was that what I described in how I was talking, or was that what I described about rowing?
No, I assume for the call that you made.
Low down is like driving low. So it's all in the footboard, all pressed. Relaxed up top. And
then same comment about just also actually what you say on the stake boat would potentially be useful. So I think we can go back to that in a couple minutes.
Yeah, well, I'll play that a little bit once we've kind of gone over it.
Yeah.
I think this is a cool example, because if I just played you the first one, I don't think anyone would turn around and be like, oh, that was really bad, but it's so subtly different. And that's just perhaps like preparation coming into things. If I'd been in the boat more, I'm sure I would have gone out first one off the gun and presented that in the same sort of way. Just reading these questions. State boat recording.
I think we'll have to get the state boat recording.
I have to get the state boat recording.
You find it. Oh, Alex, yeah. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I'm an American cock, so it's a little different, but I was just curious because I heard in both of your recordings that you called time instead of distance. And I was kind of curious if that was just like a way to kind of make the piece like more like complete and less like 500 meters, 500 meters, 500 meters, and kind of how I could incorporate that.
Yeah, so I always start the kind of the clock when I'm racing, and I want to see where we are. I think there's 2 reasons I do that. One, later in the race, I will switch to the markers. So once we get to, you know, 400, I'll talk about sharpening up and then pushing at different points and how we want to move. But I think if you think about the start, you need to think about, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of this, you can Google it, you can have a look. But if you think about the energy systems required within rowing, so you've got your kind of anaerobic systems, and it's explosive and it's the start, and you've got your kind of aerobic system, and there's multiple energy systems, there's 3 essentially, but they all start at the same time. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to go from being explosive and aggressive and the lactic acid is building up, but we want to then actually get the rowers to change gear physiologically so they can sustain that more aerobic based speed throughout the middle of the track. And so if I try and use the time to do that. So certainly with an international women's 8, I know that around 45 seconds, we're going to be looking at transitioning there. In that recording, I actually held off and did it at the minute. So I waited a little bit longer, and then I hit the go button. And that was to kind of give us a little bit more, get a bit more distance. In the race prior, the Romanians had rowed through us in the last 100 meters. Now, the objective was we thought we're going to get a little bit more just so they can't quite do it. And we got a little bit more. Unfortunately, they still rowed through us in the last 100 meters. Their sprint is amazing, you know. And I think if anyone hasn't seen it, go and watch the Europeans, go and watch the heat, because the way the Romanians can sprint in all of their boats, but especially the women's 8, is incredible. But kind of I use the time to have an idea, know where we are, and that can be a consistent thing wherever you are. So, for example, if you're in a raging headwind, it's going to be a much longer race. And so if you're going off a marker and you're calling your transition, you run the risk of staying high for a bit too long and then actually blowing up too early in the race. So that's a way of kind of like keeping it relative to the conditions and the environment in which you're in. And then you can focus on, right, okay, we're coming through 500, we're 1 seat down, we're going to sharpen off the front turn. Another thing I try and look at is you can watch your athletes on the erg, or you get an idea of this from doing just other races. I always look, okay, what's happening, or what's the boat feel like a minute in, 2 minutes in, and 3 minutes in? Because you can get quite far down a track within 3 minutes, but it's interesting at what point they start to back off the gas. And so if you know, okay, well, I'm at 2 minutes, I'm at a minute 45 seconds here, and I know usually around 2 minutes they back off a bit, because that's their body kind of shouting at them. You can put your foot on the throttle a little bit more, and you can use a call to kind of guide them into kind of keeping their hand in the fire. That's definitely something I've worked on with the coxes at UVA, is trying to think about using both time to understand where they are in terms of their energy systems, but as well as the markers. And I think that can help a lot.
Find your state boat recording.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. That was a really good question. That was really interesting. I enjoyed the physiology lesson as well.
I should have found a graph for you guys. I'll find it at some point. Right, it's going to be a lucky guess. Let me see. I don't know what I'm going to say, so this is just a prior warning to anybody.
Lane 5, Great Britain, stroked by Heidi Long, coxed by Morgan Bayhnam-Williams.
I think I do on this one. I'm not sure.
Sit forward. Romania. Square and
It's a bit earlier. Hang on.
Kevin breathe.
In lane 3, Romania.
Complete. Confident.
Sounds like we're in a fish tank.
Okay. Lauren back. We in? Keep going this way. Keep going. Yeah, we're in. Okay. Okay, guys, 2 minutes. You're just gonna breathe with me. In and out. In and out. More. Really calm. In and out. Composure. Complete. Influence.
Lineup for the women's team, Denmark in lane 1, stroke by Astrid Steinsberg, Cox by Sophie Ostergaard.
So I don't know if you could hear that, but essentially, whenever I sit on the start line, I will just, once we're in, we're attached, I'll get the crew to breathe with me. And you can hear it more down the mic than you can necessarily in that recording, but I get them to breathe in and hold their breath and then breathe out. And we'll just do 3 breaths. And it's very simple. It's essentially meditative, but it lowers their heart rates. Everyone gets calm. Everyone gets synced up. You can hear everyone going. And it's a really good way to just center any boat. So I think just something for me that's always worked really, really well. And certainly I've had good feedback on that.
I used to do exactly the same thing, funnily enough. I didn't get them to, I didn't literally say the in out with me. I wish I had now, because that sounds really cool. But I used to sit there on the start line about the same time, and I used to just say, right, okay, switch in, 3 deep breaths. And then I would give them the silence to actually do that, because taking 3 deep breaths actually takes quite a long time. So you can't say 3 deep breaths and then 2 seconds later say something. I mean, obviously, if you've got to get your bow seat to tap it because you're about to blow out of the lane, fair enough. But you need to then give them the silence and the space to do that. And then I heard you, I think you said something like you were reminding them about what you wanted them to do in the first few strokes, basically. I used to do exactly the same thing. I would say something like, so I think, for example, in that in my Rio crew, I used to just say, right, just focus on the first 2 inches. So all we want to do is grip the first 2 inches of the first stroke. That's what we talk about in advance. So the thing I would remind them right before the attention go was first 2 inches, so that they were gripped on, they're squeezed through their glutes, they've got that connection to the water, and they're just, because once you get my feeling was if you get the first 2 inches of the first stroke right, then you're going to get the next stroke and the next stroke, and it's something to build on. That was really interesting. I like that.